Okay, I'm going to have three main parts. Ethics, which fits with the Pope being in the country right now and talking about these things. Principles, where I abstract the issue of how do you get to personal sustainability, and then the practice where you see it actually happening. So the first is ethics, and it is based on the home because that's a place you can generate energy, and it's a place that you can stop wasting energy and causing carbon footprint. Motivations are, I have three grandkids, Kaylee, Jackson, and Shaylin, and these are mine, but all the future generations are important, everybody's kids, and we need to save a livable climate. Now, if you look at business as usual on a climate basis, where business as usual energy, this is the map key. Average days per year over 95 degrees Fahrenheit. 50 to 75 is yellow. There's a little yellow down here. You got a little bit of the 100 to 125 this each year. But by the time we get out to our current youth being my age or a little older, you're going to see that you have very little of the less than 10 days over 95 degrees, which dominate here, and you'll have an awful lot of the 100 days over 95 degrees, which is a bit scary. So I have a friend that rides bikes also, who's 91, and then my youngest granddaughter, Shaylin, going on 3, and when she is his age, we will go from that to that at business as usual. And that has major implications to food, to drought conditions will be really severe. So a key point is that to make ethical decisions and do ethical things, you need to understand what context you're in and what the consequences of your action will be. So the social disease of denial and deferral doesn't help get understanding, and I just love that picture when I saw it. Also, planting seeds of doubt at this climate summit, all these good things, and somebody has to go and try to distract from it. Now, we are at a situation where last year was the warmest on record worldwide. Welcome. And there's a base period which all the IPCC and other people use for average climate data, which they use for a comparison on changes. What we have seen since that base period is a shift, and this is the summer heat anomalies that were very low, less than 0.2%, have increased out to 10% of land areas, and we have extreme heat like in Australia. 90% of the mainland on a certain several day period at the end, well, New Year's of 2014, we're over 39C, which is 102.2 F, which that's pretty extreme for 90% of a continent. Also this spring, actually just basically 6 months ago, we had a continental record for Antarctica. One day it hit 63.4 Fahrenheit. Hey, that's this morning's temperature early, and it was that in Antarctica. And then the next day, it did it even a little bit better. Things are happening. On the extreme weather, boats are getting parked in bad places. That was in the Philippines. And Phoenix is getting amazing things, and you can just go through an awful lot of events recently. We've always had events, but we're getting more and more severe events. The interesting thing, summer is getting a lot hotter, winter's getting a little warmer. That I find interesting. Some people say, oh, isn't it good to get warmer? But it isn't good to get warmer, lots of reasons. Now, there is a myth that's being politically propagated that the Earth has been cooling for 17 years from that point right there. And when you look at the chart, you see that, well, that was an unusual high point, and it hasn't been cooling. Or if you take 12-month moving averages, 60-month and 132-month, we're continuing to move up, and the running means. So you've had the high point, but the general trend line is here. 100 year, it's interesting. We do have a cool spot, but that's where the extreme meltwater, freshwater meltwater, is coming into the North Atlantic. And otherwise, most of the world's getting much hotter, and that's just because we're taking the ice off of Greenland. That did the flow then in the Atlantic oceans cause it. So we had a very cold March in the east, but the world is getting hotter. Now, another threat to understanding is denial and inaction.
Is that Rush Limbaugh?
Yes, blowing smoke. But there's the other side, and the presiding Episcopal bishop, Catherine Scory, says climate change denial is immoral. And sad news is that a lot of the media has economic interests driving them, and so some of them are not really talking very much about it, and some are talking with a lot of misleading comments. But MSNBC is doing a little better. 2 or 2.5 times a week they'll talk about climate, and it's mostly not misleading. If you look at the history of our planet, the original Earth, and our climate, it was very similar to Venus and Mars. 96% carbon dioxide. Interestingly, this has changed because we had water and life, and those during this last 500 million years of the 4.5 billion years, and you blow that out, we were having animals that were depositing lime and limestone and such, and fossil fuels. So that pulled out of the air a lot of the carbon, and you have hydrocarbons and calcium carbonate. That carbon came out of the heavy amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And so we have been sequestering carbon in the earth. If we if we continue burning fossil fuels, we'll be moving back the other way, putting more CO2. I mean, we're at 400 parts per million. We were at 270 150 years ago. It's unlikely we'd ever get to that, but and it's just kind of fun to look at. Whoops, come on, where's Mercury? It's slow. Well, the temperature. Okay.
So it's going in the opposite direction now.
Well, the interesting thing is Venus has an awful lot of CO2, and it's 457 degrees C, or over 800 F. We're at about 60 F, which is 15 C. But all this CO2 makes it much hotter than Mercury. And actually, to put Mars out there, Mars's average temperature is about the same as central Canada, because it's got an awful lot of CO2, and even though it's another 50 million miles further away. So Venus is 850 Fahrenheit, or 457 C. Carbon dioxide levels now, well, we crossed the 300 about 1950, and we had never been in this range for at least 650,000 years, but probably for 20 million years.
What year was that?
About 1950. So looking at the ethics from indigenous people, politicians, formal religions, thought leaders, and aquatic comic strip characters. I like their perspective. It's very educational. Okay, a lot of little souvenirs I've collected of cultures thinking about the sun. I mean, we all see that all the time. Chief Seattle, from a pretty green city. Of course, he was there before it was much of a city. How can we sell the air? A very wise man. You go back to 1910, conservation is a great moral issue. In And he also said he does not intend that our natural resources should be exploited by the few against the interests of the many, and a livable climate is in the interest of the many.
Didn't he establish our first national parks?
I'm going to try to hold questions. He was very active, but I'm going to try to hold questions. Thanks. Interestingly, Mr. Nixon said, we must balance these efforts with concern to preserve the environment, and that as of 73, looking backwards, new energy too often damaged or despoiled the land. I think if he saw the world, what's been happening now, he'd be really upset. And interestingly, George W. did declare in the his January 20th State of the Union message that we're addicted to oil. And he then, very soon after that, did a visit to Tendril, which he had not been very supportive. Going to religions, Judaism said, humankind was not created till the sixth day. Even the tiniest flea was before. And the message there is that human interests are less than the interests of nature. And Pope Francis again today is saying a lot of great things, but he said destroying the earth is a sin, and we've seen what she said. In Islam, greater indeed than the creation of man is the creation of the heavens and the earth. And then a newer religion in the same line, Baha'i, nature is the essence of the embodiment of my name, the maker, the creator. Nature is God's will. That's 3 of their temples. But if you need to go to Scripture to think you don't need to destroy the world, that's pretty sad. Okay, leaving monotheism aside, we've had the sun god and the oil god who gets confused with the war god way back in time. And I just have a couple pictures of the sun god in India, in Ecuador. In the ceiling of the Catholic Church, the workers put little sun gods in because they were Native Americans. And at Ecuador okay. If you go back to Leviticus saying that everything was created before humans, therefore their interests should be listened to. Tell me more about the ocean acidification. It affects shell-forming animals the worst, like pteropods. Pteropods are the base of the marine food chain. If you kill the base of the marine food chain, everything collapses above that. So the oceans, we like to think about the forests being cut down, but the oceans are really critical from the food coming out of it. And not only that, but it's bad for plankton, and they produce over half of all the oxygen that beach apes, if you go to the beach, you're a beach ape, fish looking out sees you, you're a beach ape, okay, need to breathe. So half of the oxygen comes out of plankton in the sea. So, question, what are we going to do about it? Not much we can do. Well, yeah. You got to be determined to not let it happen. Now, above the water, this is Anatomy recast in 2013. Holy crap, God gives you humans a planet to tend, and you turn the oceans into acid. I kind of like that one. You like that? Okay, we'll go. Yeah. The only way to slow down ocean acidification is to use less fossil fuel. Clear. So, but who, when, and where? Well, this is Nadarev Sanyo is the representative to the IPCC from the Philippines, and during 2 of the IPCC conferences, they had major cyclones in the Philippines that did outrageous stuff. And he said, if not us, then who? If not now, then when? If not here, then where? And that gets down to it. It's us now here, or else it's getting mighty late. Many islands are basically flat, including the capital of the Maldives, and also Singapore. And sea level rise in Greenland, if you melt that and leave everything else the same, you get 24 feet. The whole Antarctica, not real fast, but you get 200 feet. Or just the west grounded interior reservoir, you'll get 17 to 20 feet. And so in any of these cases, I just like to group them by letters, but you lose all the major cities, really, if you get a total melt. Now, that's not real fast, but once you're on your way, you're on your way. Here's Shanghai. Shang means above, hai means sea in Chinese. Actually, the city of Shanghai rose with seismic activity out of the ocean a long time ago. And this part of New Shanghai, when I was there in 1982, this picture is taken from the Bund in Old Shanghai. You look across, and that was just reeds out in the water. And then NASA just said that we're past the point of no return on West Antarctic because it's not a continent. It's a big ice cap over a lot of islands. And, I mean, you could call parts of this a continent. But these are being undercut with the warm ocean, and as they undercut, they're just going to start coming off. And when they start coming off, it's going to keep going. And NASA has now determined that that has begun. It's not going to be real fast, in maybe 100, maybe 1,000 years, but it's happening. And, of course, New York and London, but not only coastal cities, a lot of capitals are along rivers, and they're down relatively close to sea level. Berlin, that's... Okay, look at the east coast of the U.S., look at the Gulf, and this is what a full melt would do. That's pretty significant. And the governor of Florida says that nobody in his administration is allowed to talk about climate change or global warming. And there's his state, and you wonder who his constituents are. So the IPCC has a chart of what happens if you do various emission levels of, and this is in gigatons of CO2 per year, and historic, and then they have all these scenarios that they have defined, a lot of them, and then this is the emissions, and then this is what band it gets you into as they accumulate. And a few main ones they've depicted here, and they have said, okay, business as usual. They call it the pathway 8.5, or a very severe addressing, cutting back, they call 2.6, a representative concentration pathway. This is what a 2.6 will do to you in degrees Celsius warming by the late 2000s. This is what the 8.5 business as usual do. And more heats, more drought. So what I'm trying to do is what all those folks and the underwater fish are saying: protect nature, abandon use of fossil fuel, me here now. That's the question to Sanyo's, answer to Sanyo's question. And that's basically, if you centered my usage, what I'm trying to do. So this is possible, but it takes people to be serious. Okay, what will the whole thing do to continents? Whole melt. And it's pretty serious what it'll do. You get a lot of inland seas. We saw that. You don't have Denmark, the Netherlands, Belgium, you know, the east part of England, the west part of Ireland. Moscow's almost at sea level up here. The Black Sea's increased, the Caspian Sea's increased, Southeast Asia major increases. You get inland seas in Australia. Oh, cookies were just delivered, thank you. And so ethical decisions and ethical actions, understanding and context and consequences. So, but now, responsibility for action. The Dalai Lama said it's our responsibility to preserve and tend, added collective and individual responsibility in there. So that means the we and the me. So individual, the me part, and the governments, corporations, and religious organizations. So for individuals, personal action on your own carbon footprint, advocacy to do your democratic duties of vote, petition, testify, canvass, demonstrate, and boycott to affect the collectives, for them to come up with green policies and strict enforcement, and agencies, corporations to have green products and operations and processes, and religious organizations and NGOs to be responsive. Okay, Bill Mckibben, and that's a picture that I was lucky to get from our videographer in the back. He caught me talking, and I thank you very much for that, Martin, with Bill. But he is the head of 350.org, and they are working on a divestiture movement, and then they've combined with the Guardian newspaper in England to come up with a campaign called Keep It in the Ground. And they break that down into keep oil in the soil and keep coal in the hole. Kind of catchy. And the future depends on what you do today, and of course, be the change you want to see in the world, and that's individual responsibility. Now, this is the nice published version of the Pope's Encyclical on Our Common Home. If anybody wants to leaf through a just printed out copy, this is the Encyclical, and Linda had printed that out for me, and thank you. I don't know if anybody, but anyway, advocacy to direct and collective action, and he's significantly, he drove up in a Fiat for this morning, not in a big SUV, and he lives in a little downsized apartment. But now, going back, I like the quote that I think is very applicable. You have to be either part of the solution or you're going to be part of the problem. And that was in the context of civil rights, but I think it's appropriate now because business as usual is a common problem. It was in the class, race, and slavery, but now it's in the common, the commons on earth, and it's a matter of vested interests that have to be fought. And I contend that environmental ethics is a civil rights issue because there's no greater civil right than right to a livable planet. We're black, white, yellow, green. We're all in trouble if the planet's not livable. And so freedom for humans to live is more important than freedom for corporations to profit from polluting. Nelson Mandela said, if we've not changed ourselves, we can't have an impact on society. So that's the individual action. Paul Hawken, an author on a lot of green topics, says, do what needs to be done. Check to see if it's possible only after you're done. Everybody says, oh, you can't do that, you can't do that. Well, you can't if you don't try, is basically the message. Example is not the main thing, it's the only thing. So I'm trying to do things that a lot of people think are stupid, but a lot of people think they're good, and I'm trying to show what can be done. So, okay, we're done with the ethics principles. I want to put out two ideas here related to this bird. A glide path. If your house cools off real fast because it's not insulated, not sealed, it doesn't have a good glide path. And it can or cannot, depending on the house design, catch energy, and I call that catching lift. So a thermal glide path catching thermal lift is biomimicry, make your home soar like an energy hawk, not fall like a carbon rock. So the thermal glide path is the passive house principles of seal and insulate. There's also the concept of catching thermal lift as in passive solar. Passive house is well insulated and sealed. Passive solar is a catching of energy. And putting PV on to catch it another way. So, my motto is catch it and keep it. Catch the sun and keep it. On this site in 1978, Ron may even have been here at that time when that. Nobody can embargo sunlight. No cartel controls the sun. Its energy will not run out. So I add, so catch it, darn it. There's lots of resources. Germany's doing real well, so we should be able to. Okay, my carbon footprint has gone like that. So it crossed 0 in 2007, went from 12 tons and is -7. I've added in other things, and it's not -7 tons a year now because it's powering electric cars and growing some food. But okay, what does that represent? It represents the operational energy, which is the natural gas and electricity. It does not include the embodied energy in the building. And you need to think about the energy in carbon to build versus the energy in carbon to run. If you look at the electricity, I got the house in 2000, well in 99, my daughters lived in it, but in 2000, the electricity was at about 7,000 to 8,000 kilowatt hours a year, and it stayed basically flat the next year, and then it dropped because I got CFLs. That's a big drop. Interestingly, the natural gas went up because I was no longer heating the house with the lights in the winter. And this is a significant thing that you see there. But this was less carbon than that was carbon saved. So overall, it was ahead. It was basically flat on the electricity till I got PV and then more PV and then more PV. I should have done it all at once, but I didn't. And then I got, during this time, I also got LEDs, which improved on the CFLs a little bit. And then electric cars started to nibble away. Here, that went up, and then I replaced the windows, and that improved. It went to triple glaze from double glazed aluminum. And then I did a little insulation. Then I got a new furnace. It went from the builder's 1970s 60% efficient to a 95% efficient gas furnace. And that was a good drop. So windows, furnace, some insulation in there. And then I did more insulation, and then I built a passive solar addition, and then more insulation, another passive solar addition. And that's 2012, and I haven't updated, but that's 62 therms, and that was 1,095 therms. And last year it was 47 therms. And I've done some more things that'll be interesting to see when we go through this winter. Now, I want to talk about embodied and operational a little bit. When you build a house new, and this is a house built to 2010 code, built in 2010, at 0 years, you don't have any operations. So it's all the embodied at year 0. As you operate, then that percent embodied and operational comes. Interesting thing is, on a 2010 house, it takes 17 years before the energy that you use equals the energy you put in on the embodied, which is, I found that very interesting. And so building a new greenhouse is not necessarily being green. It's being greener than building a non-greenhouse, but it's not necessarily. So if you take an old house and fix it up, I call those orphan houses, then you're more green. And if you fix it up using orphan materials, things that are from the closeout places, you can do an orphan house, orphan materials, and then operate it with sunshine below net 0. That's what I'm trying. So I like the idea of the home orphanage. By the way, well, I'll get to it in a second. Okay, so the embodied energy of the structure is already sunk and a sunken cost, both in energy and carbon, and the materials, if you get orphan materials, is a sunken energy or carbon cost. Okay, so where do you get them? Well, wherever you can buy a used house, okay. And orphan materials, Habitat for Humanity, Lowe's I find is real. I've done a lot there, a lot there. I've done a fair bit there, and dumpsters are not a bad place. There's also Buds and the Window Guy and Home Depot sometimes, but they usually bust up things and put it in the dumpster. They don't just sell it off cheap. Okay, this is the Cull lumber rack at Lowe's. It's good except twisty, so you work with it. So you have to be willing. This is one of the carts that carry windows and doors that are misordered. These things will get down to 90% off. Well, they'll go to half off and 75, and they work their way down. And you can get amazing things there if you watch. I've used some of this stuff out of where a former school space is being changed into the Islamic Center in Golden. Okay, so I'm going to get everybody to say, catch it and keep it.
Catch it and keep it.
Thank you. Okay. I need a little bit of. Okay, so embodied energy, orphanage, operational energy, kept it and keep it. So now energy currency. You spend energy to get applications performed for you. And so I like to think of it as a currency and even put it in banks at times. So currency and banks. Okay, there's these black guys up here, non-renewable energy currencies. There's the green guys, renewable energy currencies. And I don't consider all of these green guys to be equal. And especially between the black. These have a first cost, a recurring cost, and recurring environmental consequences. These have a first cost, but they have recurring dividends, and they have avoided consequences. And there's banks you can put them in: thermal mass, trom walls, phases change materials, climate batteries, rock boxes, thermal water, or springs, compressed air, net metering, hot salts, batteries. And I like to consider the color white as a way of getting more bounces and more visual out of your light. Now, applications for these in your life: you need lighting, cooking, space heating, etc., water heating, home ventilation, clothes drying, appliances, transportation, food production, lawn mowing, and then considerations of the applications that apply to various energies. The fungibility on a given currency, can you apply it a lot of places? For me, on an old house, solar hot water, I can't use except for showering. And if I don't shower as much as the sun shines on the panels, I'm wasting all that heat. I can't bank that very well. If it was a house that had floor heating, radiant heating from hot water, I could, but for me, it doesn't. And then, so can a currency be widely applied, and can you apply it many places? So what I've selected for the transformation of the house: PV electricity, passive solar, and daylighting. So I have climate batteries, I have water thermal storage, and net metering. I have battery backup, and I do a white decor to bounce the light around a few more times at speed of light. Okay, so summary of the guiding principles are: transform orphan house using orphan materials, utilize renewable operational energy currencies that I select because it works, and those are the three, and employ energy banks that you see there. Okay, so now the practice, taking those principles. And so here's the applications, and solar PV is heavy in here. And passive daylighting, sun ovens, space heating, indoor clothesline, and gardening as much as I can get done. Okay, PV panels, you all know PV panels. I got 9,900 watts, and it's a couple different kinds of panels, as you can see in there, on a couple other surfaces. Now, a prettier one, my daughter did a lovely system on her house that acts as a shade for the deck that was way too hot. And this is the double hits that let 15% through and catch stuff on the backside because there's 2 layers of tempered glass. Then large sun tunnels, and I highly recommend the 14 or the 22 inch, not the 10 inch. Inside, they light things really well. And I like to say white paint is to, hi Byron, lighting as insulation is to heating and cooling. It keeps it around. Sun ovens work really well. On a good summer day, you can get 360 degrees in there. Winter, you can get to 300. And then passive heating. So this is the back after putting on 2 passive additions. This is a heat pump water heater. So I got rid of the gas water heater and ran a heat pump. In the back is the furnace that I put in that went to 95.5% efficiency, and I'm trying to phase it out, and I'm getting close. Evaporative cooling. If you insulate real well, it doesn't have to run very much. And by the way, efficient appliances, Energy Star TVs and fridge, etc. This happened to be Boulder when I took the picture of the TV. So transportation, use the right tool for the job. Walking, hiking, biking, shared rides, solar powered vehicles, or monster equipment movers. So walking, lots of different possibilities. I like recycled cycles. Shared rides, they can be a lot of different kinds. Solar powered, plug in on the front of this, plug in here. Now, I did have failure of the extra battery that was put into this, so that one needs to be, I need to take a new picture, but anyway. But the Volt used in local applications got 16,000 miles on 25 gallons. Now it's 22,000 on, I think, 32 gallons. So 600, if you're using it locally, if you take long trips, you don't do quite as well. This is a GE charging system. This is the battery backup in the house. By the way, for hauling all the lumber to do the construction, you're going to see I get 13 miles per gallon on that, but there's times when you got to do it. Normally it sits there. Okay, clothes dryer. This walk-in space here is a clothes dryer in what is the passive solar room, and that's the preheater. There's clothes being dried. So most people don't talk about walk-in indoor passive solar clothes dryers. So on food production, solar powered, I mean, if you want to have photosynthesis, you plant stuff outside. This is food preservation, solar powered. This is the attic of, or the solar plenum of the second passive solar edition. So it's a solar food dehydrator. And there's grapes becoming raisins. Ventilation, powered by the PV, an energy recovery ventilator. Fresh air comes in, stale air goes out, but the energy transfers from the stale to the fresh, and this is the fresh air intake. Here's the stale air outgo, where the fresh air intake comes in. There's some water capture system down here. And the box that does that brings the fresh air in. It gets heated up there when the stale air goes out. So returning to the keep it and the catch it and keep it, the long, shallow glide path. So this is the seal and insulate. And insulate and insulate and insulate some more. And the President, I loved it when he said in his State of the Union message, I think it was 5 years ago, insulation is sexy. I thought that was just really good. And so there's your personal insulation, wear warm stuff in the winter, and your bedding layers, and this lovely bed runner, which Linda made for me. Thank you, Linda. Adding insulation to the attic is your third thermal envelope. Cellulose blown in, that level ended up to this high. That's in an accessible area that you can crawl into. And then to a scissor truss area that you can't crawl into, this is tube filling, and it's with cellulose, and it gets it to a pretty hard pack, and you get really high insulation values. I had basement walls when the house, before I got it, had the basement finished. They put a false wall and left that space, and that's a picture that I held the camera shooting sideways to get that. After that was filled with fiberglass, not cellulose, because it's below grade and you could get moisture in the cellulose. That all became filled with fiberglass insulation, and that greatly changed the basement. Then I started doing bedroom walls and thickened it with polyisocyanate foam with an OSB layer, and so you see it's not finished yet here, but the process. And that's the corner of that wall with that done. And what was an R9 became R60, and that reduced the heat loss by 85%. Doing the dining room, I went a little thicker, and this is a sample of what I did, just scraps from that project. And so I layered up polyiso, built around the electrical outlet and around the heat duct, put great stuff to seal everything up. And when it was done, that's the space that it was. It's got redwood trim, shiplap. This is all cull redwood, the twisty stuff that people wouldn't buy at Lowe's for their deck because it didn't line up. I routed an edge, made shiplap, boxed around the windows, boxed around everything. And I don't think it looks bad, but you know, it looks kind of mountainy. So I built in, then we'll get to this later, I built out too on that, and that's how it got to R104. And it went from 5.5 inches to 22 inches thick. So on the exterior, this is the house before doing anything to the exterior. One of the projects was to take, and I'll go back, that little segment between the two outset bedrooms and layered it up, had to put a little bit of wood framing on, tied into the brick. This is where the air is coming in for the ERV, and it ends up being built in. You get to that stage, tape it up with a very good sealing tape that does not let air in, put on a building wrap, and then finished it off. And that went to about an R85 or 90. On the other side of the house where it wasn't brick, took down the siding, except where the PV and circuit breaker box, boxed out around the windows with an aluminum wrapped sill. So that became like that. Layered it out, and so layering it built up until you get to there, put a building wrap on, and then put the old siding that came off back on. And then for the exterior on the foundation, it takes a little bit of work to dig. I did this in my house in Illinois, and I only put 2 inches of pink board at about R4.5, so I got about an R9. On this, I said, I'm an old man. If I'm digging a hole, I'm going to get more bang for the digging. And so added 4 inches around and of polyiso in. And then the overhangs had not been insulated at all. You looked in, most of them you just saw, if you put a flashlight in, the wood. But this one, a heat duct. So the heat duct's 1/4 inch of plywood away from the outdoors when it's -20 at night. So anyway, did that. Doorways, airlocks, and I have gone crazy on airlocks probably, but I really like what they've done. So the catch it side of Catch It and Keep It, like a soaring hawk catching a thermal and just going up, riding the thermal on up, have the house temperature right on up with the sun coming. So this is the south side of the 1970s house. with an upper deck that was rotten, a fireplace that totally cooled the house, whether it was running or not. Not the intention of fireplaces, but you know, and then a south wall here. A lower deck that had a heat wasting or energy wasting hot tub that I got rid of because you really don't need to be heating the out of doors. But anyway, draw a plan, get a permit. So on that upper space, that's the plans I submitted. Took off the rotten deck. This is, instead of scaffolding, I had collected all this insulation with OSB, and it became the scaffolding. Frame it out, and that's the build. These are recycled patio doors. This is all coal lumber. So initially, and this is what later, this was plants, but here's an airlock into this space that's an airlock into the house. This space became the clothes dryer when I got the other greenhouse built. Okay, and the space underneath that rotten deck that was usually, was before just wet and scuzzy is now a workshop, and it has oranges growing in it. It's now got an airlock to it, and it's airlocked to the basement, and it acts as a root cellar. So that became that with the first passive solar addition. And then there's more space over here to catch sun. So there's the first passive solar addition. Looking at that space, you could either do a very thin sun collector or a bigger space. I only had 6.7 feet of setback that I could go on, but I also had 8 foot of setback there. You could do one of these guys that looks like that Mother Earth, or you could buy a commercially made one that are 3.5 foot wide, 7 foot high for about $1,800. And they would mount like that possibly. Or you could build out a bigger thing, and that's what I decided to do. So I made a bigger plan, got another permit. The city was thinking I was crazy, but they gave me the permit. It took them 6 weeks to evaluate my hand-drawn drawings. So here's the west side, and that's going behind there, but it's wrapping around. And so that was the drawing that they got. Supposed to catch the smiling suns there. This is what it was supposed to look like when done. Well, that's what it looks like when done. So you can see it's catching a lot of surface. There's the before again. There's the done. I put a deck on and down. By the way, all coal lumber. These are recycled Safeway ice cream freezer doors. Use them a lot of places. They were 20 years old. Triple glazed, tempered. Don't need triple glazed, but tempered, you know. And here it is with the vineyard on the side. So there's the view from the east when done of that space and that space, and here's the original house, and that's the original house coming out to there. So that's the before the two spaces, and that's the after the two spaces. And that's the night view with some grow lights down there. So that's the street view before, the street view after, and with vegetation and the deck. Now this is what I've thickened up since this picture was taken. So to do this, post holes for the foundation with concrete and tie down piers, and up the side for the deck. And basically not a lot of space there. And then framing on up. So you can see how little it is. It looks bigger when you have it done. But it gives enough useful space. Made the trusses on site, all out of coal lumber, tying into the house. Now, the airlock coming into the greenhouse is that double door. And so it's got thermal mass water in here. That's not really a sink. It's from Habitat. It's a workspace. And it acts as the potting shed. Then the greenhouse space, when first done, by the way, This catches heat off the top, pumps it down in through a climate battery, warms the soil, and after 6 months, there's banana trees and the orange trees and stuff. So then upstairs, that's an airlock coming in to this space, which is the collection space. Lowe's has these amazing doors that every now and then, that's a red one, that's a green one. I like the idea of Christmas having red and green. When you pay $300 for a $3,000 Pella sliding architecture series door, you don't get to pick the color, and that's okay. So this initial space holds snowshoes and bikes, and then the next space through the second door is what I call the gymnasium. I didn't use that one and that one, so they're gone. I use those. But there's a door to get up to the attic. That's a step down. And this is the 1 foot thermal envelope for catching the heat. By the way, there's Santa's Victorian Christmas delivery bike, and he's got the message here that he wants his workshop floor saved from melting because it's down to 10 foot thick. It used to be 20 foot thick. So he's got a message there. And here's the reason, because our Arctic sea ice extent is really declining, and so Christmas is threatened. Now, if you put a thermometer in the envelope and a thermometer on a 25-degree morning in the gymnasium room, it gets quickly to 100, that's at 60, and that heat flows up into the top, and that's what gets pumped into the house, to the north side of the house. And so the top is the solar plenum and the solar food dryer. So this is how you get up there, and that's what it looks like with shelves for drying. So that's the energy approach again. And here's the motivations. You can add your grandchildren's names there. Now, I have 3 grandkids. I don't have 5, 12, or 15. And this is the population on Earth projected past here. And this is the world population growth rate, the growth rate. And so population is another elephant in the room, because the number of carbon footprints matters. It's how big is a carbon footprint and how many carbon footprints. And just a fun side note, Excel, or Public Service Colorado, they were doubting my gas meter, so they came out when I wasn't there without notice, and they replaced it. And they said when I called them about it, oh yeah, you requested that. And I said, well, okay. And so it's all new on August 28th of 2014. On 11/12 of 14, minus 3 degrees outside, it was still zeros. And then the next morning was minus 12. This is when we had all the fruit trees die last fall. And by gum, it's still all zeros. Now, I had to do a little something to be livable. So insulation, ceiling, layering, and I withdrew from the solar bank some electric currency, and I baked turkey and pumpkin pies and had the surplus. And so there's the 2 of the pumpkin pies and 1 little pie and the turkey. And so I was getting a little bit of heat out. Now, I want to just show that while you're doing things, you analyze with various tools. Infrared cameras are a very good tool, and this is my infrared camera in its case. It goes on to my Samsung smartphone, and it gives you 2 pictures at the same time. And it's pretty neat what it does in that little package for $300 or under. There you see it on the bottom. So I took it to a worse energy environment called car dealership. And that's what I got there. And there, it's just plugged in. Okay, so what is planned? Well, here's the satellite view. I'm working on that. The building permit's in now. And there's the diagram I submitted. And here's the windows that are that row of windows along the top. And they're all Pella, fiberglass frame, tempered glass with good characteristics, advanced slow E, tempered. They have an R value, the reciprocal of this, which is about 3.8 R value. It's not a triple, but it's not bad. And so they're pretty nice windows, and I got them all for, they were $500 each. I got them all for $500 because they've been sitting there a long time, and I said, what will you do? I'm thinking after that about doing that, but that may or may not happen as a second airlock on the front door. And so a lot of people like to know about economics, and I don't consider monetizing my kids' future. And I will say it's a much better ROI than a lot of habits like playing golf, drinking coffee, bowling all the time, drinking a lot of beer, smoking, tickets for driving drunk, and gambling. Because investing for dollar growth in a future dead world is a fool's pursuit. Anyway, the cost for all of that, those 11 rooms, came out to this, or $33 per square foot. They're not all season rooms because they're not heated, but they heat the house. And about half of that was materials, and I had a neighbor that I paid labor on that helped me out. And he's a very good carpenter. And that's kind of a summary of other costs over 14 years. And so the total cost, and I'm not adding PV because that's coming down so fast, $54,000 over 14 years, or about $4,000 a year to get 11 multifunctional rooms that are seasonal and comfort and saving future stuff. And so I view it's doing my duty. By the way, if I would buy 2 packs of cigarette a day, according to the web, it tells me $4,000 a year, so that would be about equivalent to what I've done over that 14 years. Or if I bought 1 cocktail per day in LA at I guess a mid-grade bar, I don't know. Or I could get a 3-for if I both got 2 Starbucks Grand Lattes and got a 7-day lift ticket and did a cheap version of a 7-day tour pack. Okay, that's the options for $4,000 a year. And these are the rooms that I've got, including 8 airlock entries that have shared functions doing other things. So now these rooms, multifunctional, seasonal, they're enclosed porches because they're not heated. Therefore, the building standards are not as tough on them. I try to overbuild to the standards anyway, but interestingly, and they're not fossil fuel. Most are conditioning, not conditioned spaces, and they have a lower tax assessment. Enclosed porches are assessed at $40 per square foot, which is more than I've paid, but my own labor wasn't figured in there. And so, summary, there's no greater civil right than the right to a livable planet. So that's the real bottom line, and adopt orphans. And I did it all as nibble jobs. I mean, I'm an old guy and I work a little bit and I go away. And I work a little bit and I go away. So anyway, thank you for your attention. If there's any questions.